Hello, welcome to Framework, a podcast about compulsively collecting cards, apparently. I am Al Schwartz. With me, as usual, is John Bernard.
Hey, it's me, John Bernard.
And returning to join us as we're talking about games and game theory once more is Mr. Tyler Jakes.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
You first, I think, came to talk to us about Dungeons & Dragons many moons ago.
Yeah.
Today, I want to talk about Magic the Gathering, the collectible card game that I played in the 90s in middle school, and then have picked up kind of recently to play on my phone again. And it's got me pretty deep into the modern version of it now. And I got thoughts and complaints and gripes.
I will join you right there.
Do you guys have a background with this at all? For context, when I was playing, I came on around 4th edition, and Ice Age were the big ones.
Yep,
Ice Age for a couple years.
Right when I joined Arabian Nights, that area. Yep.
Okay, so that was just before I would have started, and then I was off for a long time, and now it feels like a pretty different beast on the phone.
There were kids that were literally given detention for bringing their Magic cards to school because it was a new thing. People would steal each other's cards. It was bad.
I remember it being the hottest thing in the world. The physical cards were everywhere for a while.
When Pogs were out, Magic was in, and it was it was banned from my middle school because I went to Catholic school, and it
was the devil. Was it the devil?
Yes, that was partly the devil, and partly I think the Pog thing of this is just introducing strife into the classrooms, the competitive aspects of it, and the teachers don't have a firm grip on it.
So you guys only invite me on to podcasts talking about satanic things, Magic cards, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, you are our Satan expert, Tyler.
So have you played straight through, Tyler, or did you?
No, I stopped and I got back in
straight through
for Return to Ravnica back right around COVID. Dropped off again. For probably the same reasons that I have the feelings I do now. Got back into it a few months ago, been playing online, and probably will be putting it to bed, hopefully forever.
I'm at a loss when you guys say, that's from the Ice Age and the Magic Arabian Nights phase happened. I'm out on that. This is something that passed me by when it initially happened. I was doing other things nerd wise. And eventually it was just the accumulation of time. It kind of was why wouldn't you know about Magic? It's huge. It's a very big thing. You're not too cool for it. So why don't you give this a shot? And I had a little Magic phase as a result. But it never got deep into the bones. I've returned to it a few times, mostly in a video game format, I would say. Probably the biggest Magic the Gathering period I had was on, I think, the PS2, when it was just a card game you could play on there, and usually against a computer generated opponent.
It does seem odd that it hasn't been fully there's not a definitive video game form of Magic, which surprises me. I gather I've never played Hearthstone, but I gather that it is sort of the premier deck building video game thing.
It's a little dated at this point. It's sort of like the World of Warcraft, I think you'd say.
Is that not still going strong, World of Warcraft?
Well, they are. They were too big to ever really go away. I think Hearthstone the same. But, if you played Hearthstone 10 years ago and tried to pick it up now, I think it would have almost no resemblance to what you remember. It would be my guess.
I haven't played a ton of other collectible card games. In that stretch of the 90s where I was getting into this, there was sort of a mini boom of them. So we tried out a couple of other ones. There was a Star Wars CCG there. We played because we were the type of dorks that we were at the time. There was a Monty Python, the Holy Grail.
There's an Austin Powers CCG.
There is. That's a whole tangent. Had to point people to 1-900 hot dog for a deep dive into that. But Look, have you played any of the other more modern ones? Either of you, the different deck building games?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of deck building games in general and in the digital format. I'm literally looking at one kind of, I would say it lives in that same genre of deck builder, which is Gloomhaven. Also, my closet is Dominion. There are a number of other games that are that use the basic concept of deck building as a mechanic in the game itself, which I really like. I like the idea of being able to like build something to do an engine or to accomplish a task or to create a combination, which goes back to the original Magic the Gathering, why it was what it was, why it still is what it was. I've played some Hearthstone. I think that I never got into it. I didn't care about like the world of it, but I did like one specific thing, and that is the removal of Mana Screw.
Hearthstone is literally World of Warcraft. I just remembered, isn't it? It's the characters
Branded.
of World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
Shit. Okay. Well,
so is there something? I guess Tyler, you'd have to be the one to answer this. That Magic, as the original, does better than other deck building games, or did first? Is there something that has been iterated on by one of those other ones you mentioned that Magic can't catch up with, or like?
I think that there was a design choice back in the early 2000s with the surge of board games, things like Hearthstone, other competitors in the market. Now there's Lorcana, which is a Disney-themed CCG. There's other game companies that have taken it rather than being a CCG, and now they're doing more of a living card game where you build your whole card base, and it's more of like a collaborative storytelling experience like Arkham Horror, which is fantastic, by the way, if you've never tried it.
it's a good one.
But
I thought that was a board game, though.
It is, and then they created a living card game that you can play a card-based like storytelling experience. There's Earthborn Rangers, a couple other ones that have come out recently. But back to your original question.
Is that more of a collaborative thing, or is that a one-on-one?
Yeah, there is. Those are both collaborative, but there are also games out there that do more of the competitive against each other deck building, or like Dominion is a direct against an opponent using the same card pool kind of thing. Yeah. But to your original question, I think that none of these things would exist without Magic the Gathering. And all of the core concepts started with Magic. Maybe somebody else would have come up with them later, but without Magic, you wouldn't have the asymmetric design, the different styles of play, the different ways of getting cards down. What does a turn or those things look like? And then back to what I was saying earlier was in the early 2000s, I think there was the distinct choice by Wizards of the Coast to not change things. Hearthstone had come out, gotten rid of the idea of mana screw, mana flood. And there have been a lot of people, as I'm sure you're one of, that it's a frustrating experience in Magic. And they had the opportunity at that time to change a core component of their game, and they didn't. And so to this day, mana screw, mana flood are still core components of Magic, which is by and large the same game that existed back in the early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it does. Fundamentally, the rules have not changed. They have iterated on like the abilities of the cards, but you might have to, because
I need a definition on mana screw personally.
Yeah, and it's been 20 years since I played this with anybody that I was speaking out loud to. You know, so I guess that's not true. I played with my stepson some, and he had a Magic club at his school that I volunteered with for a little while. But the kids were not using that term. I assume you're talking about just when your entire game is hobbled out of the gate because you don't have the right lands.
So like to get the base design, right? You have cards in your hand, a card's in your deck, and all those cards have a certain mana value. The amount of energy or
it's the
cost,
currency.
It's the currency, thank you, that you need to have to be able to play the card, right? The more powerful cards require more of that currency than the weaker cards by and large. And every turn, you're allowed to play a mana from your hand, which are other cards that you have to be able to fuel that engine. It's like just having dollar bills that are sitting in your hand that you can only play one of a turn. And
Yes, you play one land card, and a land card can be used once per turn to add 1 mana of a particular color. And there's 15 asterisks that go along with that because there's a lot of ways you can play more than one land on a specific turn, but that's the general rule. So you build up your stockpile, and on each consecutive turn, you have more. The idea is you'll have more basically money to play with to play your bigger and badder spells.
And so what might happen is we can get into like the deeper things of color and asymmetric design of it. But let's say you're just playing one color deck. You're just playing green, and you draw a hand that has 2 green in it, and you have your 1 cost green card and you have your 2 cost green card. But also in your opening hand, you had a 4 cost green card. So you need to draw more green lands to be able to play that card. But what you draw every turn isn't land. So you never get to play that card. So what you were expecting to do in your game, you have no control over. You are decided by the random assortment of cards in your deck that you will lose this game because their luck was better than yours.
Well, isn't that a function of any deck building game? I mean, there's probability. Even the lame dumb ones that I'm more conversant in, that is going to be an issue. That you might just be fucked in this round. There's a 30% chance.
Even as a card game where you're not building the deck, it could be gin rummy or poker or whatever.
Anything with a dice, honestly.
I'm not saying that. I'm not a fan of randomness in general deciding games, but I do agree that without having some element of randomness in game design, you're going to have a less fun experience, right? If I know every time that this is what I need to do to accomplish, and there's no impediments along the way, then that's just what I'm going to do. Like even Risk at the base level, like you have to roll your dice, you have to see what you roll, and it is going to be what it is. But the critique that Magic gets is that it can so fundamentally hobble your ability to play the game because it is a requirement. Where on the flip side, let's say that you are currently on a board deficit, somebody's beating you down, you need to get an answer to what they're playing, but all you're drawing is mana, which have no other function besides giving you that currency to play cards that you're not drawing. So there's 2 ways, if you think of it like an asymptote, that you could have a bad game. And there's actual statistics that show that like something like 30% of all games are actual quote unquote games where both people are playing cards, doing what their deck is designed to do. Yeah. Because the other 60% of games, one person just doesn't get the mana or the other person only gets mana or those kind of things. And then there are other games that are actual quote unquote games that both people were screwed or flooded. And so that's why it's a good game, because they're both dealing with the same problems. But I think that the problem I've always had with Magic is that if only 30% of my games are going to be real games, why am I playing this thing? I'd rather play Risk where I can roll a die, but at least I'm in the play, right?
I want to circle back to that,
sure.
get more to the modern day, because that will tie into some of my complaints about how the game's developed. But I want to, before we jump to that, I want to sort of keep us in the foundational era and say, because I always looked at that as just sort of part and parcel of the deck building thing. And that's part of the strategy of it, is trying to balance how many, I want to have exactly as many lands in here as I need and not any more. But that if I get too greedy, then I'll end up mana screwing myself too often. And if I'm too conservative, I'll mana flood myself and not get to hit the heights of what this deck is capable of either. And I always looked at that as, I don't know, the least fun part of the fun, but an element of the part of the fun. But what I want to talk about first, though, let's talk about some of the things Magic does really well. And one of the aspects that I am most impressed by from a game design perspective is, I think you were referring to it as the asymmetric design angle. So in the starters, they've kind of messed with this over time too, but in the starting thing, there was 5 colors of Magic that you could have. There's white, black, green, blue, red. And they all have their own strengths and weaknesses that, white's the best for gaining life. Red is good for doing direct damage to things. Blue does the weirdest like manipulations of your deck or your hand and your opponent's hand. Green does the biggest creatures. And so all these things are built differently to have different strengths, different weaknesses, and yet it was balanced well enough that, at least when I was around, there wasn't really a time when like there was, oh well, black decks are completely dominant, and so like everybody is just doing that, or everybody's agreeing not to avoid that, so we can use some of the other stuff. There was always ways, because I said you could do a one color deck, but also you weren't confined to that. Most decks are probably 2 color decks.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with you. Having played it back in that original iteration, yeah, sure. The mana issues aside, it was fun to be able to like build a black deck that was restricting my opponent to require them using the rack and what was the other card? The
Icy Manipulator, maybe?
No. This is like the original, like 2 cards that you would play. One would damage your opponent if they didn't have a certain number of cards in their hand. The other would damage them if they had too many cards in their hand. And then your other cards would be to force them to either draw cards or discard cards so that you were always pushing them outside of that middle range. So they're just being damaged by playing the game. So like I so did. Yes. The mono black is super, super annoying in the card manipulation, hand manipulation. But I never felt like the game was, I always have to play blue, or I always have to play, these combinations of things. Back then, they weren't as good at designing cards, and so it was individual cards that were imbalanced. So you would have the era of the two powerful one card thing that everyone would just have in their deck. Like that was the issue at the time. But I agree with you that at the basic level, because it was early, they were saying, great, you want to do damage to the face? It's red. You want to manipulate somebody's hand or kill creatures? That's black, so on and so forth.
Well, yeah, that was the thing. I think you're right. They weren't as good at designing cards. So you would have cards come out that would then be banned from competitive play individually.
They still do.
Yeah, that still occurs sometimes. But like I said, the great thing about it is I guess there's also just so many iterations and combinations of things you could do by shifting those colors around that, like I said, there was always an answer or a way to look for an answer to whatever type of deck you might be up against. And that's what sort of, when I'm looking at game design these days, that's something I'm interested in as a hobbyist, I guess. I'm most impressed, especially on like a board game front, when you can have multiplayer board games that have distinct factions, where it's not like Risk, where everybody, everybody's armies function the exact same way. But there are, I'm a big fan of the Game of Thrones board game.
Yeah.
Is not perfectly balanced, but there are 6 different houses you can pick, and they all have different cards to play for the fights. They all they have different geographical areas that they start in with different strengths and weaknesses, and they all play completely uniquely. And to be able to do that and still have a general sense of balance is really impressive to me. And I can't think of another game. It's like Magic the Gathering and StarCraft that have these completely different, like the factions play completely different ways, and yet they are so evenly balanced that each one has an answer for things the other ones can do.
Well, I mean, the industry of the gaming board games and video games, I suppose, have kind of taken this concept and run with it at this point. There's some incredible examples of this now that exist. I mean, me and Tyler, I know we've certainly played some Game of Thrones board game. That's sort of where it starts, I would say, on the board game front. There was like an incredible boom in board games about 15 years ago, something like that. Is that right, Tyler?
Yeah, it's still growing. We'll see what tariffs do to it, but yeah.
There was a massive amount of innovation in the field. And I mean, I've seen some stuff that is like, what's that one, Tyler? Root? Is that the one?
That's one of the guys I was going to bring in today was Cole Werrell. He's created things like Pax Pamir. Arcs just came out last year, but Root and all of its expansions he's really, really good at creating a game that is only asymmetric, like win cons, faction powers, and that they're very crunchy. Like you have to like want to learn the rules and understand how it works to play them. They're not a light game, but when you do, it's very rewarding because you are feeling exactly what you're talking about there, Al, which is my faction does this, and that's an answer to this thing that he does, and those sort of manipulations of the game.
Well, that's something interesting though to me. Maybe you guys are deeper into this than I am and can explain to me why it's not such a big deal. But at the level wherever I am on the spectrum of layperson to nerd, I like asymmetric factions. I don't know that having different win conditions for those different factions is something I really like. I think it's cool when the different factions have different routes to the same goal.
It does become sort of a different game you're playing sometimes, and that can be a positive or a negative, actually. You can get into a situation where, well, my goal is to get these 3 people wearing the same shirt or whatever, and then another person has, a completely different thing that's going on. They're like, well, I need to have, 75 different armies. So that becomes different games that you're at, and that bothers me a little, I will admit. I do kind of like everyone playing the same game in a sense.
I think that there's ways to do it right, because I agree with you. I think the biggest failing of most of those games is people don't like you watch a movie and you're like, this person was not in the same movie as everyone else because of their acting style or, whatever. But, and that can also happen in these games. But I think that a Root is a really good example of a game that does that well, that you're still influencing the game. You're still playing with everyone else, and everyone is able to influence your game through what they do naturally, even though they know that you might be trying to accomplish this thing or that thing or whatever. Most of these do come down to usually victory points, and that's the way that they sort of unify that. But there's different ways to get there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a simple and more well-known example of it would be like Settlers of Catan, right?
Yeah.
That, like I said, uses victory points. There are different routes to that, so maybe I've decided my route to victory is to get the longest road, whereas you're trying to collect the largest army. And so, but that never gets to the point where it feels like we're playing completely different games. It feels like we're in a race.
Well, that's because both of those things are only worth 2 and you need 10.
Right. Yes. And that's a great design choice there.
Yeah. But there are other games that do the same thing. I think an interesting one to bring up here is Battlestar Galactica, or the recent reskin of it by Fantasy Flight Games, Unfathomable, which is a Cthulhu-themed reskin of it.
Always wanted to try that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you should. It's a great game. I have BSG, and I think that it's great. But the idea behind it is, if you ever play or watch Battlestar Galactica, you have the humans and you have the Cylons, and everyone has their own faction that they start out secretly at the beginning of the game, and one side is trying to make the ship, in essence, crash, and the other side is trying to get it to Earth. And you're all using... Yeah.
Can I ask you something? My for Christmas, just recently, my stepson got the Thing board game.
Yeah.
So we haven't had enough people to play like the proper version of it yet. But does Battlestar have the same sort of thing? There's like a game of like Mafia or Werewolf or whatever that's built inside of the board game, and you have somebody use a sleep engine.
Absolutely. And it's all trying to figure out who is who and kick them out and that kind of stuff, and like point fingers. Absolutely. It's an amazing part of the game. The TV show The Traitors, I hate that it's all reality stars, but I love that they're all playing Mafia. So I definitely get behind that part of the game. But to your point is, they have 2 different win cons, but the way they're doing it is by using the same card pool and by doing the same sort of things, same places on the board that they can go to, but certain characters are better at space flight. Certain characters are better at shooting guns, whatever the case might be. Again, that's asymmetry, and again, asymmetric goals. But they're all kind of using the same mechanics to get there. So there are other games that do those same sort of things.
Yeah, well, and I guess it's technically a different win condition, but it feels a little least more connected to me when the win condition is, Team A or Team Human is trying to escape from the base, and Team Thing is trying to stop them from escaping. And either, or that.
Well, I mean,
it's still they're still after the same. Yeah,
it's all over. You'll find stuff that's very much the same, very very far afield, and I imagine there's good versions and bad versions of each, probably. There's probably some excellent games with very different win conditions for the players. It's just a matter of how you balance and how you design it, and the sky is the limit there. You can literally do anything, and there's even a market for it now. Like you can come up with anything. That's what's kind of exciting about those the adult board games that are out there is that they start with the assumption that you're a big dork and you're going to spend hours figuring out how this works, so they can really kind of go for it.
The downside is, holy shit, is it a lot of homework to get one of these things going?
Yeah.
And I mean, again, I'll wrap. I love the Game of Thrones board game. I've wasted far too many hours on it. And it's a weird way where I almost it is one of the most incredible feats of cross media adaptation I've ever seen, because it is so appropriate thematically that the board game version of this book is very, very long, incredibly complicated, incredibly unforgiving of a small mistake a lot of the times. But man, it is difficult to get into. That's not a casual one.
No, definitely not. But I think that it is a really great example of the ones that do it well, because you're not just playing an engine, right? Underlying that game is an engine. But when you're playing it, you're feeling like you're participating in the Game of Thrones, which is, I think, the ultimate goal of any entertainment experience, is that you are feeling like you're there, whether it's a great movie, a great book, a great board game, that you want to be a part of it. And that's why I think that one particularly succeeds. If you are looking for other board games that do the same thing, that are lighter, give me your player count. I'm more than happy to send you some recommendations, because my closet is full of them.
Well, I mean, that one's Game of Thrones is great because it has the diplomacy angle to it in addition to the strategy portion of it, and there's a randomization element to it. So you're playing Risk and you're playing diplomacy. There's because it's a combat.
There's a poker element too. You're kind of reading your opponents.
Yeah, there's a bluffing element, which I love. Bringing it back to Magic, what's great about Magic, or at least in its original form, is it was a running counter to a lot of what we said about these modern board games. Relatively easy to pick up once you've figured out how a turn plays out. You could learn how to play the game in about 15 minutes, and then it's one of those things where it's not unlike poker. It is fairly easy to learn and then impossible to ever fully master.
I put chess in the same category, right? Incredibly easy to learn, impossible to master.
Yeah. Chess is more theoretically masterable, because it's a closed system without the randomization element. So there's always that thing of computers will completely solve chess at some point, we think. And granted, depending on who you talk to and how big of an AI nerd they are, they might say that they've almost solved poker now, but I think that's kind of bullshit myself. I think that's all.
The human factor.
Yes.
Well, I think they built these AI models that can play hundreds of millions of hands in the blink of an eye and so much. And I think what they actually did was develop computer programs that got really, really good at playing other computer programs.
Right.
And then they remain pretty exploitable.
And at the end of the day, though, even if we do solve things like chess, poker, Magic the Gathering, it's also a relatively closed system of cards and, that kind of thing. They can play infinite number of hands, but there's
randomization and there's imperfect information. Chess.
100%. But I think what I'm trying to get back to is that even if you solve a game, if I'm playing it, I'm not playing it against a computer. I'm playing it against John or Al. And so because of that, someone might have more knowledge or more memorization or more, experience with that AI function that solved it. But I'm still playing against a human being. And that's where the competitive element comes in. So I don't think it actually matters if we solve those things.
Well, there's also the great thing where somebody's ignorance can be something you don't expect.
Oh, yeah.
I love that when just but no, you didn't. Oh, no, I was counting on you to. Oh, no, you were too dumb.
You didn't understand the rules, so you did this thing. Yeah.
That's always
that's what's great. That's what I love about poker as the classic example, because it is this, and why poker is ultimately unsolvable is because as soon as you solve it, if the other person knows the solution, they just have to go one more step and say, well, because you did everything perfectly, you assumed I would do this, but I will do that instead.
Yep.
And then there's one more exploit that then has to be factored in. The other great thing about poker in that way is that you can beat the other person by being one step ahead of their thinking, or sometimes, like John was saying, being one step behind it. Makes you end up landing back in the same spot.
Or back to Magic, just lucky. My most intense experience playing poker, I was in Vegas with a couple of my friends. First hand, I'm at the table. This is college, so I was only willing to be able to take $400 out of my checking account to be able to play. But that's what I needed to at a $1 stake. I had to have $400 at the table to even play. And first hand, I made a big bet after the flop. Guy pushes in, all in against me. And I'm sitting there just losing my mind, because if I did all of the thinking correctly based on his play and my understanding of the game and, all that kind of stuff, I had him beat. But there's also a part of my brain that said two things. One, if I'm reading this wrong, or if the next two cards come out and I'm just bad luck, I've lost everything I brought to the table.
Yeah.
And so I think that gives kind of like a roller coaster experience to
What happened?
the game.
What happened?
I doubled up on him, and he was very mad at me for the rest of the night. But, I had him beat. What are you going to do?
One of the only people whose formative poker story is a win.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the other great thing about poker, as opposed to chess or tennis. It is a game of skill to a degree, but it's not like, if I'm playing Gary Kasparov in chess, or if I'm playing Serena Williams in tennis, I'm never going to score a point on her. Like that, like I will lose every one of those games. I could play the best poker player in the world, or I can play the worst poker player in the world, and I will win some hands against the best player, and I will lose some hands against the worst player. And you can do everything right and still lose. You can do everything wrong and still win that particular hand. And that is it's the maddening thing about poker, but it is what keeps it endlessly exciting and interesting. And it makes it addictive in a way that chess is not to common folk.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's also the reason why Magic has such a long longevity to it, even with all the changes and, in my opinion, bad game design choices that they've made over the past 20 years, 30 years. Anyone can beat someone else, right? My deck can beat your deck if the cards are right. There is that element of randomness and luck that comes in.
Yeah. To a much smaller degree than poker, because you get to build your own deck, right, as opposed to if you're playing with a traditional deck of cards. It's more just luck of the draw on some of that. But if you have designed your deck that much better than I have, then you can beat me 95% of the time. Except
until those 30% of the time where you don't draw your lands, or I only draw lands, then you probably win.
Yeah, maybe.
Now that aspect, to circle back to that, the mana screw, as it were, that is something that I feel is part of any deck building game to some extent.
But not modern ones. Hearthstone got rid of it. Marvel Snap got rid of it.
Well, I mean, I'm playing Marvel Snap, and if the wrong cards come up, I'm out of luck. I'm going to lose that.
But every round, you know that round one you will have ability to play a 1 card. On 2, you can play 2 1s or a 2. Then 3 1s or a 3. So on and so forth. Every round exactly how much money you're going to have. So you can.
That's how they solve it.
I'm not putting down my own resources there. They are granted. They are by the grace of God. I have 3 chits for this round, kind of thing. So I guess that is the answer. Which, what is it about Magic that is uniquely bad at this? And I guess that is it exactly.
Well,
that you manage your own mana.
When I phased out of the game was when most of these game design choices were being made, because there are a lot of arguments for different ways that they could fix this, right? Beyond just doing the every round you get 1. Like a lot of the mana choices aren't singular, right? You're not just playing a green mana. It could be a green mana that does something else, or is it green and black mana, or
Right.
a lot of other things they've done to complicate the design to give it more strategic choices and decisions that you're making in deck building as well as when you're playing. And that I think is good. But at the end of the day, the core game design of did you draw enough or did you draw too many affects too many games for it to be a good design choice. So I think that there are ways to fix it that they just have chosen not to. A quick random thought that I had is you have a deck of mana and you have a deck of every other card. And you could choose every round to pull a card from your deck of mana that still had varying abilities and things that they could do. Or you can draw a card from your deck of, whether it's instant sorceries, creatures, blah, blah, blah. And so you have the choice to do that kind of thing. And there's still an element of randomness, but you're more control of what's going on. Like that's a simple design choice. It doesn't mean that it's the right one, but it would remove all of those times where I just feel like I'm not playing a game anymore.
Okay, well, this is what interests me, but I'm not sure I agree with you. Maybe it's just because I'm not developed from where I got into this in the 90s, and so I'm set in my ways. But I think it's debatable whether that's a better game. It's a more strategic game with less of the randomization element to it, but I've always kind of been drawn to that aspect of it. That the idea that even if you and I are playing each other with the same decks, the exact same decks 500 times in a row, we're going to have 500 unique games.
Yeah.
Because we're going to get different cards in different orders, even if they're the same set of cards we're drawing from. And that's what's sort of cool and endlessly renewable about Magic to me. But I think getting to some of the modern day stuff that I don't like. I mean, there was one other thing I wanted to mention about, we were talking about asymmetric, win conditions earlier. Magic has a very limited degree of that. Traditionally, the game is both players start with 20 life, and as soon as somebody is taken down to 0 life, they lose. And there are a couple others. They had a condition that they added right away that says, if it's my turn to draw a card and my deck's out of cards, then I lose automatically, which was an interesting choice, I thought, because it seemed more intuitive to me at the time that, I just wouldn't have any more cards to play, but what I have, we'll just continue to play with what we have on the board. And if you have more cards to draw, you'll have a huge advantage on me, but maybe I can grind it out if I have a big enough advantage already. But they did it this other way, whereas if you draw, if you're supposed to draw and you can't, you lose. And so that led to
that was to mitigate. So because you're only drawing one card a turn, right? And every card has variable ability, whether that is call it a blank card because it's either mana that you didn't need or a card that you couldn't play, right? That most games early on, and I'd argue most games today in Magic, come down to card advantage. It was to mitigate people just building a deck to draw as many cards as possible. And John, you should be familiar with this by playing with our other friend Alex. He loves draw mechanics. If he can draw more cards or if he can draw more things, that's what he's going out after, because that's what's going to win him the game. Because by and large, you have more options. You have more ability. So I think that design choice to when a player hits 0 cards was to say, hey, man, you can draw a lot, but at a certain point, you will run out of resources. And that's the game, right?
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, there's also just a natural balancing act of, well, if all of your cards are just served to draw more cards, you do need to eventually hit something that allows you to do something to win the game, other than just draw more cards that'll let you draw more cards. But that is a very much an element to every, I have 40 decks on my phone of every combination of colors you could have, and a couple of them with all 5 at once. And all of them include, like, one of the core questions is, okay, but how do I draw extra cards? Because you also get to a point, most fun games are the ones that go on for quite a while, but you also get to a point where the game is not as fun if you both played all your initial starting hand out, you're down to 0 cards, and now you're both just drawing 1 card per turn and playing 1 card, and maybe it's a land and doesn't do anything. It is both more advantageous over your opponent and more fun to, if as the game goes on, be able to find some ways to draw extra cards and keep playing more and more spells, taking more turns. And I don't think that's necessarily a fault of that system.
No, I don't think it is either. I'm just saying that because you have a 30% chance to draw a card that doesn't do anything, because a third of your deck statistically is what you want to have your mana
Roughly.
be, because that is going to allow you to open with the right number of mana, blah, 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 blah. Like that's why people build with 20 to 27 mana in their deck of 60 cards. That you need to have card advantage because you're going to draw so many blanks. But I think that that's one of the reasons why I dislike that as a core component. Like a third of my deck are things that don't do anything.
Yeah.
Like I want to play. I want to feel like every single thing I'm doing gives me agency. And
Yes.
the best designed deck has some times where I have no agency.
Yeah, and it's a matter of degree. When is sometimes too much, and when is it part of the randomization element that keeps the game fresh, even when you're playing the same deck that you've played 400 times before. But speaking of that, the point of bringing up the thing about losing by drawing cards is that now it's gone on long enough. They've introduced enough cards that you can build entire decks around just forcing your opponent. They call them mill decks now. I can play cards that make you just take cards straight from your deck and put them into your graveyard without having the chance to play them out of your hand. And so you try and just run through your opponent's deck instead of damaging them directly and get to the point where they're run out of cards and you win automatically. And so arguably in that sense, I am then playing towards a different win condition than you are if you're just trying to do 20 damage to me to kill me. But it's still, we're in a race with using your cards are your way of winning that race, and your cards are also my way of winning that race. So we're still kind of competing for the same thing. Then they also introduced poison counters at a certain point where instead of doing 20 damage, sometimes if you do 1 damage with this particular type of creature, it puts a poison counter on the player. And if they get to 10, then you win the game automatically. And there's tons of different ways to add counters to people. That I don't find that as fun. That does feel like we're playing 2 different games to me, more so than the one where I'm trying to go through your
But
deck.
you're still racing. Can I do 20 damage or can I empty your deck before you?
Yeah.
So, I think that I agree because I don't enjoy that part of the game either. But it's still, at the end of the day, I'm looking at it going, okay, can I do X amount of things before I get to 10, which I can't control, right?
Yeah. I just think that there's a mechanic that they introduced called Proliferate, which just lets you add a counter to anything that has a counter on it already. And with the poison decks, that it can get to a point where the other thing that I want from these games is our decks and our cards to be interacting with each other. And the worst kind of decks for me are the ones where it feels like that player's cards are not interacting with mine, and they're just.
But
doing
there's
a sort
so
of
much
solitary
variability in the cards that exist now that I would say that most decks are actually trying to design away from interactability to try and do a thing that you can't control because you don't know when you're sitting down what you're going to play against. So I'm going to play a thing that you probably can't interact with so that I can beat you before you can beat me. And I'd say that most decks right now are designed to win. Like if they're getting the things that they need to win on turn 4, that is a 2-minute game.
Or it's longer, but it still sucks. Like
this
is okay. This is the core point of this is the core of my gripes that we're finally getting to here. So the way the game has developed over time, I think it's sort of inevitable. I think the core of the problem is the power creep that comes along after 30 years of this game, where they've been introducing a new set once a year or twice a year even. And it's kind of unavoidable. Like you're never going to move backwards, right? You're never going to say like this set has weaker creatures than ever. Like that's not going to sell to anybody. Even if you kind of want to reset the game to like, maybe we don't want to have too big of creatures coming out too fast, but there's no way to do that effectively. And the reason for that is I think there is an argument that could be made that, well, there's no like sacred level of, a 2-mana creature could be do 2 damage or it could do 6 damage. And if that that those creatures are available to both players equally. It's not and balancing it in favor of one person over the other. But to me, the problem with that is it changes the way the game is played. And like, I would compare it to say in football, for example, over the years, or baseball, they have changed the rules, adjusted them to lead to higher scoring games, basically. That there's more protections for quarterbacks, and just touchdowns are easier to come by than they were 50 years ago. And that does not necessarily, favor Pittsburgh over Indianapolis. They're both playing by the same rules, whatever. It is a different game than when Johnny Unitas was playing it, but it's still just as competitive, arguably. The difference between that and Magic, I think, is that football is not a game that ends when one team scores 20 points. The game is still the same length. Mm-hmm. Magic has not deviated from the idea that you win by losing, or by losing 20 life, or is how you lose. And so when you have creatures out on turn 3 that can do 8 or 9 damage, instead of that taking until turn 6, there's just less play in that game. Like football would be a worse game if games were ending 2 minutes into the second quarter routinely, because players or a team had hit the point cap.
And it exacerbates my original issue with the game, which is mana screw and mana flood. Because if you are saying, I need to respond to your threat before turn 2 or 3, otherwise the game is over.
Right.
And that means I get 2 draws. Draws that could be 30% of the time nothing.
Right. I mean, you start off with 7 cards, so I guess you have it. But this is the other thing. The other thing that kills me about it is the effect of this. It means that the coin flip of who plays first decides. It's such as outsized importance as to who wins the games. When games end on turn 4 or 5, whoever went first wins 50% more than the person who went second. And that is no good, in my opinion.
I completely agree. I mean, I think we're just listing a bunch of things that I don't like about Magic, besides the color blue. And we can ever get into that if you want. But I think that is a bad design choice.
I'm a little curious about that.
Yeah, I maybe want to touch that. The other thing that I want to get to now, or with the current state of things, it seems like they've steered into the idea that nobody's actually playing this with live cards anymore. Because when I can't imagine I'm playing this on my phone. A lot of these cards, I think a good thing. I don't know what to do about the power creep necessarily in terms of like resetting the creature strengths. I mean, I think maybe it just raise the starting life to 25 instead of 20 might be one way.
The core issue came a number of years ago. I was trying to find the name of the card, but there was a 2 mana, so you could play it on turn 2, that I think it was like a 3/3 and did stuff, right?
Yeah.
And because of that, people had to figure out ways to remove that thing or just play with the card. And because everyone was playing with the card, or everything, that meant that removal had to get cheaper and quicker, which meant that then control decks that were preventing people from playing things or removing creatures from the board or stopping spells, that kind of stuff, got cheaper and happened faster. So that meant that everything dropped down to what you're talking about, where games were quicker, because they had created this card like 10 years ago that rather than just banning and removing it from the ecosystem, they're like, okay, this is now our new norm. All creatures have to be this good, otherwise people aren't going to play them. Or we're going to have to make all removal, all other cards be cheaper, faster, earlier. So it was like something that happened in the 2014, 2015, something like that.
Well, okay, this is another thing that's interesting to me is, again, arguably having games go like not take that long, not a bad thing, not a good thing necessarily either. But what makes a game's speed or its pace feel good is an important question to me. And so cycling this back to, because like I said, having a game be decided in 3 turns does not feel good to me. So it doesn't feel like there's a lot of play there. Having spells be cheaper so that we can cast more of them and have more interaction between our decks, that's not so bad to me on its face. But like tying this back to board games, for example, one of the things I've liked in modern board games, or that I thought was a good innovation, is one thing that can be painful about playing, say, Monopoly or Settlers of Catan, is one player taking forever on their turn. They have to decide, okay, I can do this, maybe do this, maybe do that. Okay, I want to do this, but that means I need to do this first. And hang on a minute, does anybody want to trade me for this? And now people are going to the bathroom, and it drags out the game, and the game feels slower. Whereas I look at, there are some other games, like Ticket to Ride, for example, or Splendor is one that we like at my house. I think the genius innovation of those games, from where I've sat, is they reduced it. Each player's turn is a single action. You choose between a couple of 3 or 4 actions you could take, and where on the board you do it makes a difference too. So there's an element of strategy to it. But because the people only have one thing to do, their turns are going quick, and the play is moving along, and the pace of it feels a lot better than a Monopoly.
Monopoly.
Which, I mean, ultimately, that you can only do one thing a turn, and that's roll the dice.
Yeah. You can decide to. No, you kind of. I was about to say you can decide whether to purchase the thing, but that's not really a choice.
No, it's not a choice. There's very few choices in Monopoly.
Yeah. No, but in Splendor, for example, I don't know if you guys have played that one, the jewel collecting game. You have one choice in what you choose. Like there can be a little bit of agonizing over it, not knowing what to do, because resources are limited, and you have to decide sort of what you're steering towards. And then if somebody else scoops it out from under you, then you have to redirect. But the game moves, and that's what I think if I were the Magic designers, I would be focused on not trying to make sure that a game doesn't drag on for more than 10 minutes, but trying to ensure that turns move fairly quickly, and that it feels like the game is moving at all times.
Well, let me put this to you. Like I said, I was not as ground floor on Magic as either of you. So I came to it later and had some fun with it. When I knew we were going to do this episode, I downloaded the Magic the Gathering app and I played around with it some, and ultimately I kind of lost interest in it. And I think a lot of this is kind of like, it is the Rosetta Stone for a lot of these game designs, a lot of this kind of game, the deck building, the things you would play online. But it is so locked into what it originally was, and all those original design choices. And there have been so many iterative versions of it that have happened since, that have streamlined those or gotten rid of them or just changed them in a way that made sense for somebody who wants to pick up and play. Around the same time I got the Magic the Gathering, I got the Marvel Snap app, and I'm still playing that one, which is a dumb little pocket game that is just easy to understand and play, and you don't have to worry too much about it, and you're competitive right away. It's just streamlined and easy, and yes, you have to look at Wolverine and stuff while you're doing it the whole time, but it's as a design, it suits my needs a lot more than Magic the Gathering does.
Oh, we're going to pretend that it's such a burden on us to look at Wolverine?
No. Well,
we're too cool for the X-Men now?
I've unlocked many different versions of Wolverine. In fact, it's I have a preferred Wolverine portrait for my card at this point, because it's a powerful card.
John, to your point, and I think to Alice, I think that you're proving what Alice is saying. I think that the goal of these games is to give players as much agency and interactability as possible in a short time.
Yeah.
And I think that is where Magic the Gathering fell off about 20 years ago. And
well, it's an institution, though.
It's an institution, and they just want to make more and more and more money, and they're making the packs cost more and whatever. But to Marvel Snap, I think, is a really great example of it does what Magic does, but it makes sure that the game lasts for a certain number of turns, and every turn, John, you get to play cards and I get to play cards. And that doesn't happen all the time in Magic. Or worst case scenario, which is why I hate blue, I get to play a card, but your card tells me I don't get to play my card, and now it's your turn, blue. Oh, you get to play cards? Well, I didn't get to play cards on my turn. Oh, my turn again? I don't get to play cards again? Okay, cool, great. So who's playing this game? Just blue. So to Marvel Snap, and why I think you enjoy it more, You get to always feel like you're trying to accomplish something, even in the worst point spread, even when you know that he's going to get certain locations, you feel like you're striving towards something that you can't always do in Magic the Gathering.
It's very much, I think, a medium thing as well. It's, if a game on my phone, well, first off, the interface is way better. Magic is locked in with their interface, which doesn't work on the phone necessarily. Anywhere, nowhere near as well as this thing designed specifically for it. Exactly. Magic game design predates smartphones. Marvel Snap entirely exists within the confines of a smartphone, so that's just an obvious difference. But and the other side of that is I would never own a deck of Marvel Snap cards like an actual one that I would take around and play. There's no reason for such a thing. I can't imagine that ever being, because it's not the build of the game. It's not made for that. So, I'm looking for something easy that I can play on a subway, I suppose, as opposed to, something I can master and go to a convention with.
And I don't think that there's a problem with, Magic could embrace its role as the one for the old heads that is more about depth of strategy and collecting than it is about quick hits and clean gameplay on a smartphone app. But I don't know that it's done a great job with that either, because Marvel Snap also has the benefit of not having been around for 30 years and having to just continually put out new forms. New Wolverines and Weapon X's and Omega Reds.
It is Hearthstone. It very much is just Hearthstone. It's just 10 years down the line, Hearthstone. They've kind of dropped all the things that were making Hearthstone feel old and unwieldy, and all the power creep that had happened there. They can just start over. I'm sure in 5 years, Marvel Snap will have those problems of its own. If it still exists. It seems like a life cycle thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that has become more apparent to me over the last 6 to 10 years of the stuff that I'm able to look at on the phone is they got bored in the initial going. There was, a half dozen like special abilities the creatures had. They could have flying, they could have trample, they could have first strike. Those meant specific things. All those still exist, but every couple of years they have to add a new one in. And now
every couple of years, I would argue every 6 months.
Yeah. Every set has, I'm just talking about one word abilities. But now there's all these cards that the decks are built around have just these paragraphs of text about this unique ability that this card does under these circumstances. And that, even on my phone, a lot of times I'll be playing this game that I'm very into and I'll see it put down. I haven't seen that card before. And I'm not reading that text. I guess I'll just deduce how this beat me after it happened.
I guess I lose.
Yeah. But I'm not going to bother with that. And I think another great innovation, they actually they could integrate, going forward, just follow old school Twitter rules. This 140 characters. That's all you get for this description of this card. If it takes more than that to describe what it does, then make it do something else.
I just want to swing back around. I just realized right after I said this, that I would not have a physical deck of Marvel Snap. I actually have a pretty extensive collection of Marvel themed deck building cards called Legendary. I just remembered this.
Yeah, it's a different kind of game, but Legendary is fantastic. There's a lot of different. There's Aliens, Predator, Alien versus Predator. There's a lot.
That's a thing. Yeah, I have like the Big Trouble in Little China edition of it as well. There's a lot of those things, and you can mix and match them. So you can be like, well, Wolverine and Jack Burton are friends now if you want. So that's a really good deck design game, actually, Al. Physical version of it. They screwed around with an app. It wasn't very good, but sorry.
I'll mention this to Tyler one time. I was going to. The idea that anybody would play this live feels ludicrous to me because so much now,
you think they do in high schools? Young people who don't have jobs.
There's some Monday Night Magics or things like that people just go to a place and they play against people. It's less than it used to be because of COVID and changing things, but yeah.
But also, I wonder, that's not the really high level stuff, I think, because when I the really good decks I play against online, they're all built around you would have to have a spare stack of 100 token cards, and then you need 50 counters because they're all producing all these. I play a card, and that card produces a bunch of stuff on its own, and it just constantly. It would be so much work, like homework.
Oh, the tabletop
So-
setup. Tabletop
Yeah.
setups are beyond what you've ever seen nowadays.
Yeah,
It's,
but to your point, a couple years ago, John and my mutual friend gave out starter decks of Magic because he's a big Magic fan, and
I got-
he gave
yeah, I
them
got-
out. Yeah, you
the
got
one
one,
physical
right?
deck I have. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he gave them out, and like each deck had its own pair. It was like white, black, or green, blue, or whatever the case might be. And Amanda, my girlfriend, had never played it before, so she was like, "Oh, I'm curious. Like, let's play this game." And she's a gamer, right? She could play heavy, crunchy games. She could play against you in Game of Thrones. She could, play the lightest, whatever. Very versatile, great gamer. So we go to a wine bar, and I'm like, let's bring our decks and we'll play. And we're playing this. This is supposed to be the starter deck. And like as we're playing the game, which also had a mana screw element in our very first game, but half of her cards required tokens. So we were literally taking napkins and tearing them up and putting them on our table and realizing we didn't have enough space. I'm like, how is this the starter version
Right.
of the game? Right. So to your point, it is so much easier to play in a digital format, though, and beyond just tokens and paper and cardboard and all that kind of stuff. It also, by being digital, because of the format they have now, it allows people to not have to spend too much money to get the cards they want to get. If they want a rare card, they don't have to go to their local game shop, hope somebody has a copy of it, pay $15 for that card. They can just use what they call like a wild card and just choose that that's the card that they have because that's what they want to build, and that makes the game much more accessible to everybody. But it also means that everyone's playing the top tier decks all of the time.
Right. That's true. But yeah, even on the phone sometimes, because they've gone so far around the bend of needing everything to have these new and impressive powers, and they have to get bigger and more elaborate. There will be times when it just that you see the stack of cards that have been played or abilities that have to activate, and it just goes to such a degree that I'm like, I'm not even going to pay attention to what's happening the rest of this turn here. Even on my phone, where it's doing all like the math for me and everything, it can become too much. And I guess that's the other thing is that I'm griping about is too many passive abilities on the cards. I've been surprised how much this has been a thing for me. The kind of deck I hate playing against most is a shrine deck, which shrines are a particular type of enchantment that you put out, and at once per your turn, each shrine does something, but it does it X number of times for how many shrines you control. So my opponent's playing this, and it's like
This happens now in the current meta. There's a shrine deck.
I hit him again on the app sometimes.
Really, I've never played against this.
But it just sucks. I feel like I'm not playing against it either. It feels like that this deck is on autopilot playing itself, and I'm amazed at how much I'm like. The point is just, and why I'm a little resistant to the idea of like removing the mana randomization element to it. Just the idea of tapping mana to do a thing, and then having that interact with my opponent's cards is so much more engaging than my opponent just having a card that does something automatically once per turn. If he has to expend some sort of resource to activate that thing, then it feels like, okay, we're playing a game here. We got something going on. You're doing a thing, and I can react to that.
Absolutely. I think that goes to broader game design as well. If you play a lot of competitive games or even cooperative games, when someone has the choice to get, and Baldur's Gate, playing Witcher, any of those games, when you have the choice between an active ability or a passive ability, I will bet you most players will choose the passive ability. Yes. Not only because they don't have to do something, but because it is usually more powerful than the active ability that is the choice between. And that's why I think that passive abilities are a cheap and not interesting game design choice. So I completely agree with you here.
Well, we're about to, John and I are about to talk about Dragon Age here coming up. And that is something that in my builds there. I always choose the passives first. And that's partly because they're going to activate on all, there's a cooldown for my activated abilities. And so I'll use them once or twice per battle. And then the other 9 or 10 times between those, the other So it's a small passive, but it'll activate so many more times without my having to babysit that character. I want to babysit my deck in a collectible card game. I want to be actively strategizing here, doing things. So I think particularly for a collectible card context, passive abilities should be disfavored relative to active abilities is my gripe.
That's your only gripe.
Other than everything else I've said.
Yeah.
Like, I still love it. I played this game tons, I mean, as I get older and spend more and more time in the bathroom, I've just played it more and more.
and by and large, the games are quick, so they are digestible. But I think that the problem I always come back to when I do play, I can play a game of chess in probably about the same amount of time using blitz rules or whatever as I can play a game of Magic, or there's some other games I can't even think of right now that I can play in a small amount of time. But in chess, I at least feel like I have agency on everything, every turn. I get to choose what I'm doing. I could be losing. I could be just destroyed, but I get to do something every turn. And I don't have that with Magic. And so I usually come out of most Magic bite-sized
experiences.
Yeah, of being frustrated, really, really angry because I feel like I've been punished for taking my time to digest, to take a bite out of this game. And the game said, guess what? You had an awful time. And not because of anything that you did.
Well, I would disagree. I think you're not designing your decks for enough card advantage.
I'm playing literally the exact top tier decks that everyone else is playing. I meta deck it because I don't want to deal with, coming up against a meta deck if I'm not capable of whatever. But I find that in 40% of my games, I just didn't draw the right card, or I drew too much mana, or I didn't draw enough mana, or whatever. And I'm like, so 40% of the time I'm going to have an awful experience?
I don't know. Well, I mean, if you're playing a top deck against a top deck and you're both good players, then every game is going to be decided by who drew the right card or didn't draw the right card to some degree. But I don't know that doesn't always mean I had a horrible time when I don't draw the right card at the right time.
So I think,
but when it's over in 3 turns, yes, and when it's over in 3 or 4 turns, and I feel like I didn't get to actually do anything.
Yep.
There's moving on to the next round then.
There's a current meta deck called the Azorius Omniscience, which is a white-blue deck, right there, blue, which its entire design is on cards that either clear the board, stop you from playing cards, removing cards that you're playing, and trying to get 1 card into its discard and 2 cards into its hand. So it's a combo deck, right? But once it gets the 1 card into its discard and those 2 cards into its hand, it wins the game. Period. End of story.
But
and it can do that on turn 4. So for 3 turns of the game, if I'm playing first, I'm being countered for 3 turns in a row. Maybe I get something out. I've done like 5 damage, 7 damage, 8 damage. I'm doing something to it. But on turn 4, I just auto lose. How is that interesting?
I don't mind. So combos that are, I mean, that sounds relatively easy enough, relatively complicated enough that you have to get these 2 cards in your hand and this card in your discard.
Well, if it's on the top of the meta deck, that you find
it is literally the top played, most wins deck that exists in the current meta.
There's another thing that does shit me sometimes. There's decks that are built around, there's different cards that say, whenever your opponent loses a life, you gain a life. And that different card says, whenever you gain a life, your opponent loses a life.
Yeah.
And once your opponent gets out one of each of those, then they do 1 damage and it just back and forth.
Pings. Yeah, it's the Orzhov life gain. Yeah.
It's an infinite loop.
Yeah.
And that sucks. I hate that deck.
Yep.
How do you, that sounds like that would just never end, right? You have to.
But
it ends when you
between the 2 decks is that at least cards. Right. At least in the Orzhov deck, the gain a life, lose a life, recursion, you can kill those creatures, or you can remove them from the board, or you can deal enough damage to them first, or whatever the case might be. But the Omniscience deck is something you cannot stop, because its entire hand is either cards that stop you or cards that search its deck for the cards it needs.
Oh, shit.
So every turn, you are either being punished for playing a card. Oh, by the way, when it does get to, wait, let me finish. When you get to play the card that you want to play, and they stop you from doing it because they have an Afara's dispersal, or they have what's the counter card for 3 that also gets to survey their deck. So not only do they get to stop you from playing, but they get to look in their deck to make sure the cards that are coming up are what they want. And if it's not, they get to put them in their discard. Oh, wait, what do they want to do? Put 1 card in their discard. So the entire time, every round, you're either being punished for playing a card because you're doing what they want you to do, or you're not playing anything and you're just waiting for them to get the cards that they want to have happen because they get to play on your turn.
I disagree with you that anything that denies your opponent's play is punishing them. I think removing creatures, countering spells is all part of the back and forth of it. That's the interaction of cards I like. I'm not necessarily going to agree with you that Omniscience should probably be banned as a card. I don't like that one, but we're getting into the weeds.
Sure.
The one last thing I would want to say is cards that are or decks that are built around a genuine combo of 3 cards. I don't mind that as much. The thing that kills me is there are a couple of cards that are like 1 card combos that can win just by themselves. If you don't have an immediate thing, like the one that, as an example, in the Lord of the Rings expansion, they have the Horn of Gondor that it's like 3 mana, and then each turn you can tap it to create an exponential number of 1/1 tokens.
Oh, it's like the goblin guy.
Yeah.
Who just creates more goblins every turn. Yeah.
And it doubles every turn the amount you can make. And it's way too cheap to be out quickly. And so I've lost games never getting a chance to do much of anything. Not because they got the 3 cards they needed to, but because they got 1 card out quickly. And that 1 card created 400 creatures in 3 turns.
So I think, Al, what I'm trying to get at is that where we are with blue in particular, right? Black has its own removal stuff. White has its own removal stuff. Red has its own. Every color has its own removal stuff. But by and large, those removal spells, those counters, even though nobody else counters but blue, they only do that thing, right? They remove that creature. They clear the board, whatever. But by and large, the blue cards not only stop you from playing, but also let blue do something. And that's my biggest problem. If we were back in the 1990s and blue had either the choice to play counterspell, which they had 4, maybe 8 of in their deck, and that meant that you just didn't get to play, but it didn't do anything for blue. That's a choice. That's a strategic choice. But now
that's just slowing the game down.
Exactly. And that's what blue wants to do. It's a tempo game, right? And that's fine. I still hate the game design choice of having a color be you don't play cards. That I think is a bad game design. But now we have a situation where blue will likely have 12, 16 copies of counter or stop cards that also do something for them. And that's where I think that we've gone way, way, way too far.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have to go deeper into the weeds about what those individual counterspells are at this point. I think we've hit a lot of the main points. But I think those, or at least what's clarified for me, is the ideas of pacing is really important. Interactivity between the players, particularly when you're playing the one-on-one duel games, is really important. But yeah, I don't think that's what I think you want, whether you're doing a card game or a board game, is you don't want the board game can take a long time to finish, but individual turns should not take forever. And players should always feel like they have something to do that is interacting with the rest of the game.
Yeah, I think
those are good principles.
Yeah, that sounds like a good rule of thumb for any game. And yeah, I mean, based on what you guys are telling me, in surprisingly not present in a lot of Magic games. This has not changed my opinion that I'm probably not going to get into Magic at this time in my life.
Well, I think that the quote unquote real Magic experience now is the best of 3. So you're not playing one-off games against people. You're playing a game. You see what their deck does. You have the choice to change things out for your deck. You play to the best of 3, and that's where competitions happen. That's, but I still don't find that as to be a necessarily interesting experience, because you're still running into that mana screw, mana flood, randomness on the top of your deck. At a base level, I don't find an interesting game design choice. But
I mean, it's just been iterated on so many times at this point. It's just like it's been digested by so many people and built upon that. If it changes too much, it's no longer Magic. I mean, that's sort of what happened with like Final Fantasy, which is like a video game corollary, I would say. Sort of the foundational RPG,
right?
And now the industry has learned and taken so much from it that it basically has no resemblance to its original self, except there's chocobos. Like,
were there chocobos in FF1? I don't think so.
Oh yeah, well,
yeah. Well, there were by 2 anyway.
Okay. Certainly by 2, we had chocobos,
or
Ifrit and Shiva. The summons. These little ghosts of the original idea that are still popping up in modern.
But to give,
but there's just the accretion that's happened over the years too. Though, is that you can't get rid of the chocobos or the summons, but you have to keep adding these other things to make it more like Skyrim now or whatever.
Right, and I think to give Magic its due, because I think it really does deserve it. It created a whole new set of mechanics, game design, game building things that, because of what Magic did in the 90s, I can now decide Magic isn't the game for me. John, like you said, Magic isn't the game for you, but there is a game out there that built off of Magic to do the thing that you wanted to do, which is Marvel Snap. For me, might be Arkham Horror LCG, or whatever the case might be. So we have to thank Magic for that, and that we should also say, if you play Magic and it's not for you, there is a game out there that is.
Or it might still be for you, Al.
No, it's a bad game.
You also just maybe haven't found your deck yet.
Oh man, I've played so many decks.
Yeah. Maybe that you need to do vampires or something.
I played Orzhov Lifegain. I really loved the mono black discard deck, but it wasn't the meta. I've been playing a lot of Red Burn right now, which is also incredibly overpowered. You can just win on turn 3. I play all the decks. I just don't think the game is good.
Yeah, that winning on turn 3 thing is an issue. I think that. Just you want there to be some strategy. But okay, I think we got a lot of this out there into the ether.
I feel like the minutia of this we could go on for another 3 hours to no greater effect. So yeah, we can wrap this up. But that's been fascinating, actually. This is great. Thank you, Tyler, for joining us. Always a pleasure, man. And thank you for listening. That's it for us. Have a good one.